Hey everyone, it is Patrick McLain, your host for this Reimagine. I think this is our 15th event. We've been trying this new format that we think is pretty exciting, kind of pairing students from all over the world with various people throughout the industry, and just kind of having open conversations about the current state of the market and what's exciting and what we see coming around the corner. So before I go on too long, I will let our student for this panel introduce himself. Anthony, how you doing?
Great. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So my name's Anthony Garrett. I'm a senior at Gonzaga University. I'm a member of the second Spawn Fellowship. And I'm working on two projects right now, one called DeFi Steward and the other called Bankless Advisor. Really excited to ask James some questions.
Yeah, glad to have you. Thanks for joining. But James, you wanna introduce yourself and maybe give us a little bit of overview of what ConsenSys is, that organization.
Sure. My name is James Beck. I'm Director of Content and Communications at ConsenSys. So I sit within the marketing team. When I first joined ConsenSys in 2017, marketing was kind of a newer concept. We were not really thinking of ourselves as an enterprise company or even a software company. We were primarily incubating different groups of people that were thinking, hey, how do I build an application on Ethereum? How do I improve the core protocol? How do we build a wallet? How can we create an API service so that other people can build on Ethereum? So as the years went on, we decided to actually create an integrated software stack around MetaMask Infura. So a lot of people have heard the term MetaMask. It's the most popular global self-custody wallet. And when I say self-custody, it means you hold your own keys, you hold your own crypto. You can use MetaMask to connect to applications like OpenSea or DeFi applications. You can also do things like swap. You can stake on ETH2. You can bridge to different networks and other EVM compatible networks. And most recently, we launched a sort of manifesto, an educational touchstone called MetaMask Learn. It's to teach people about Web3. It's to teach people about identity in Web3 and Ethereum, and also the importance of self-custody, along with three very introductory segments on NFTs, DeFi, and DAOs. DAOs stand for Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. What I like about it, though, is one of the scary things about getting into crypto, and especially when you start doing things on chain, which is our way of saying directly interacting with a network like Ethereum or Arbitrum or another network, is that you commit real money to it. This is crypto, this is magic internet money, but when you try to test out something to learn it, you typically have to load up your wallet with 0.01 ETH. So with MetaMask Learn, we have a simulation environment where you can actually connect to a wallet or understand a concept without actually having to use the real MetaMask. And this is sort of like rich environment that we want to start including in the app itself, and really just make it so that people can feel comfortable with some of these new Web3 concepts without actually having to risk connecting to a scamming site or losing, connecting to a site that you shouldn't. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And my background is actually Chinese and international relations. So when I studied in undergrad, I didn't know I would work for a tech company. I was doing more like political affairs. And one thing I do love about the Web3 space is that it does seem to be the intersection of huge questions about what is the future of money? How can we engineer money around communities' values? And inevitably, it's also touching new regulation and the idea of what is a security, what is not a security, and finally art and culture, because I think some of the more exciting things happening in the Web3 space are around creators and the ability to sort of own the financial instrument that is your distribution, that is your rights to a song or to art. So thanks again for having me, Patrick, and really nice to meet you, Anthony.
Yeah, definitely. And for everyone who's not too familiar with ConsenSys, I encourage you to kind of check them out on their story. I think not a lot of people truly understand just how much impact they've had on the space. The founder being one of the co-founders of Ethereum, Joe Lubin, as well as products like Infura, which I think kind of underpin like so much of the market from an infrastructure standpoint. One thing I'm curious about, and maybe it kind of plays into the learn stuff. Obviously over the last few months we've had quite a bad news cycle between what happened with FTX. You've got these banks closing, regulators coming at it. So really curious to hear, how is that affecting your guys' mentality going forward? Are you guys more worried or scared about the market now? So just kind of want to get your guys' general feel.
Yeah, I mean, in November when, it really started with Luna last June 2022, and we were kind of at the high watermark of a bull market for crypto and generally equities. And, many people would argue that the entire market was pretty frothy. But at the same time, what we were noticing was all of these incidents, and whether it was BlockFi or Celsius or eventually FTX, they were all what we call CeFi in our space, so centralized finance. And in a lot of ways, they're not too different from banks, and in worst case scenarios, shadow banks. And so you're a customer, you put some money, they custody your assets, and they do stuff with your assets. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of transparency into what was happening on the FTX side. A lot of customers were not aware that they were so leveraged and that a lot of their leverage came from their own token, FTT. So it was kind of in some ways, calling a bluff, or really they were revealed that their entire business model was built on a house of cards. And I like to remind people that in November, when this started happening, DeFi, meaning decentralized finance, all the protocols that make up over collateralized lending, so things like MakerDAO, which is a stable coin, or Aave, which is a lending protocol, they were humming as usual. And the reason why is that the whole point of DeFi is a smart contract executes as written. So sure, there can be an issue if you write a faulty smart contract. There's definitely been DeFi hacks because it's still early stage. But the idea that I can trust something, or I don't have to trust an institution, I can just trust the smart contract behind it, is pretty revolutionary. And so, as we were waiting for Sam Bankman-Fried to release information on their reserves at FTX with real, decentralized finance protocols, you didn't have to ask anyone. There was no one that could be covering up anything because all of it was transparent on chain. And so in a lot of ways, ConsenSys and our main products like MetaMask and Infura, we were pretty unaffected, except maybe you could say we were affected by general public sentiment turning and souring to crypto. But it does present us an opportunity to really teach people about self-custody and on-chain financial products, and really just teach people that this revolution is going to be tantalizing for people because they're like, wow, we have now the ability to create financial primitives out of thin air. But unless it's on-chain, unless it's transparent, there's not a lot of reasons to trust it, because there's no FDIC insurance for CeFi companies right now.
Yeah, and speaking of that, this interview will be played later, but today we're experiencing the fall of Silicon Valley Bank, right? So whether it was trust in crypto companies keeping their treasury on FTX, or normal companies, quote unquote normal companies, keeping their cash with regular banks, this distrust element is, and I think especially in this period of time in the world, is becoming more and more clear that the clear need that we have. But Anthony, do you want to take us in with your first question?
Yeah, I'd love to. And you briefly mentioned how CeFi is this house of cards operating essentially the same way that banks do now. But then if you put all of these like securities primitives on chain, like you can't really hide what's going on in the black box of CeFi or banks. But how do you, as an investor, or the mass population that doesn't understand how to use like query a database like you do on Dune, like how do you understand like the objective return potential of these different DeFi protocols? that makes sense?
It's a great question. I really liked, there's like been interviews about DeFi for some time, and everyone still wonders, hey, so like you're still putting money into a smart contract and hoping for yield. And if you're not, you're right, a sophisticated investor looking and creating your own SQL dashboards using Dune, you're going to have a hard time parsing what is real, what is not. I ultimately still think that the things we're missing in DeFi is some sort of credit worthiness score, and not necessarily a one-to-one with what exists right now with like a credit rating, but just some sort of way to be able to take out an uncollateralized loan. Because in a lot of ways, like if I can put up 1.5 ETH and take out 1,000 USDC, if I have enough money to over collateralize my loan, I probably don't need the loan as much as someone who's, in a developing country saying, I need to actually take out $1,000 to buy grain to be able to plant next year's crops. And so there needs to be a way of assessing creditworthiness of people that doesn't exist on chain. So then you kind of ask, well, what is there? And I still think one of the best barometers of any blockchain protocol is how many people are using it and what is like the daily volume going through, and inevitably staking. So some people, right now there's a big debate in the United States about whether or not staking services, such as the one that Kraken offered that the SEC is investigating, whether or not staking services are essentially, allowing customers an investment in this security. And we actually just published, our lawyers today published an article saying, no, not only is staking not a security, it is security for the network. So when I think about, in some ways people consider staking a DeFi activity, I would agree, because what you're doing is you're essentially fulfilling the rules of the protocol. You're providing a service and you're getting paid for that service. And so we advise people, and as a part of our own writing guidelines, don't use the words like yield or, juicy yield when you're talking about staking. Literally, you're validating transactions, you're providing a service, and you're getting rewards. And protocols will have rewards based on how much the protocol is being used. And historically, Ethereum is the most used blockchain protocol. So I really think if you're trying to get into this, start with staking.
One thing I'll follow up on there, when we talk about kind of like use cases or numbers that are bring in like lots of users. I saw the other day you guys did an announcement with, I think it was Unity, the gaming engine. Do you mind talking about that a little bit and how important that you guys think that is?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a game developer, but game developers are very familiar with Unity. It's the engine behind things like Call of Duty. There's a couple blockchain games that use Unity as well, such as Decentraland. And ultimately, this is the main sort of construct that people use to create games. So what we recently did with MetaMask and Infura was say, we're going to actually add MetaMask, their standard development kit, MetaMask's SDK, and also Infura and API access to Ethereum, to the game assets or to the asset store for Unity, so that if you are a developer and you're making a game and you want to have some sort of NFT component or maybe rewards via token, you can build it right into your game. And we've made it easy. And not only that, we're going to be going to a conference called Global GDC. It's like a gaming conference. We're going to be like working with developers to help them go through their examples and tutorials and use cases. I think, if you think of the evolution of different things happening in crypto, we like to start with like basic use cases of money, sending money, receiving money. Then we talked about early examples of decentralized finance with composable parts like stable coins. We talk about NFTs, we talk about DAOs. Gaming had its moment with Axie Infinity, but I think that was also just like a real flush of interest in a play to earn game with a lot of users in the Philippines and Vietnam. I think we haven't yet seen all the potential with in-game items being transferable across games, with things like your reputation being transferable between games. So I'm pretty excited about that use case.
Yeah, it seemed like a pretty big announcement. I feel like not everyone fully grasped like the how much potential that actually has. And I always find it's interesting with the gaming community. They always have like they've had different attitudes towards the crypto world. But hey, Anthony, you want to take us in with your next question?
Yeah. This next question kind of goes along with the mass adoption question. So essentially, like money and hype got a lot of people into the ecosystem, but that doesn't necessarily make people stay. Usually, it's something that like clicks within like understanding broad scope of Web3. So it's a two-part question. So like first, like what clicked for you to keep you like building in Web3 in like crypto winter, and then two, being in the marketing industry for ConsenSys, like how do you make that light bulb moment happen for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to the first question, what clicked? I think in a lot of ways, if you grow up in the United States or even Canada or Western Europe, money is already, it seems digital, and we wouldn't consider ourselves lacking options to have financial infrastructure. And what do I mean by that? Like, you can walk down the street and go to Wells Fargo and open up a bank account. Even as a college student, you probably have secured loans to help pay for your education, or you have access to financial, through family networks. We have a lot of access to existing financial primitives. When some of my coworkers, though, especially coworkers who live in high inflation rate regions, so talking Argentina and Nigeria, for them, even the simple ability to access US dollars is pretty game changing. And so if you can take your salary and convert it to USDC in a way that you can do so literally with an app on your phone, that is a sort of monumental change. It's all of a sudden there's a flattening of global differences in the same way that the internet made it so that people could view news simultaneously in different parts of the world, or view information and send messages. You all of a sudden have the ability to like transfer in and out of currencies, and really you give like USD exposure to people all over the world who may not have the banking infrastructure to be able to do that. The other thing that I think is sort of a light bulb moment was like NFTs are kind of polarizing, because people are like, why would you want to buy an entry in a ledger that points to data that might not even be on chain? And so when I say points to data, it could be just a JPEG image that is sitting on someone's server. But when I understood, one of my family members works in the music industry and really is just buying and trading rights to songs. So much of an artist's work exists outside of themselves, meaning it's the publishing rights agency. It's in a lot of cases, it's a label. And in the same way that the internet made it so that you didn't have to rely on a magazine to get your idea out, I really do believe that these new financial primitives mean an artist can own their own distribution and their rights and the relationship with their 100 greatest fans without any platform intermediary. And that is still being slightly explored. And there's really cool projects out there like sound.xyz. I really like Catalog, but even those are slight intermediaries. They're still taking the complicated blockchain stuff, they're packaging it up, and they're saying, here's a platform, you're an artist, we're going to give you a distribution platform. But in the end, artists should be able to basically create their own website with easy to use tools and their own minting engine, and be able to sell their work to their greatest fans without people even necessarily knowing they're buying an NFT. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten your second question now.
Yeah, it was just essentially like, how do you get that light bulb moment, or what will be the light bulb moment for, the masses, for mass adoption?
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, the mission of ConsenSys is we provide a lot of software tools and tools for developers, but we also like to think of the idea of you can be a builder in Web3 without being a developer. As soon as you're building wealth for your family, as soon as you're building a way to connect with your 100 greatest fans through an NFT, in a lot of ways, I think you're a builder. And so there is going to be no monolithic answer for everyone. If you're into gaming, it may be that moment when the hours and hours you put into a game and the rewards you've earned from that game are transferable to another game. If you're a musician, it might be that moment when you've sold your first album to just 100 people, but they are all of a sudden in a Discord channel with you and they're going to your concerts, and that it's going to be different light bulb moments for different people, because I do think this is as general of a technology as something like the printing press. And like what the printing press was doing was it was saying, no longer are these friars and these priests who spend all day writing, they were the only ones that could write. They were the only ones that could disseminate information. They literally took ideas, they copied it on pieces of paper, and they produced books. The internet transformed that, or the printing press first transformed that, because now anyone could use that technology and create a book and disseminate it. I think this is essentially, we have this magic printing press where people can take this technology and disseminate value. And it used to be just the hands of banks and in the hands of the financial wizards or the financial priests that kind of pulled the strings. And now, in the same way the internet gave us all access to information, I think we really now have individuals getting access to these financial tools.
Definitely. I want to go back at one point you were talking about earlier, and I had just mentioned on another panel, like I used to live in Tanzania like many years ago, over a decade ago. I was seeing what they were doing with like M-Pesa and all this like mobile money, and like I always found it interesting just how big of a disconnect there was. Like the Western world kind of didn't know anything about that at the time. I think they were kind of shocked to hear, oh, like they're sending all money from their cell phones. And I think, how do you guys view like regional strategies? I mean, like, do you guys foresee like a lot more growth like in developing countries who kind of like are going to skip over the traditional infrastructure, kind of like they did with cell phones? I feel like there's not a lot of hardwired internet in a lot of the developing world. They went straight to like 5G, right? So how do you guys view strategies regionally?
That's a really good point. I mean, I do think that technological leapfrogging is possible, and it's like what happened with M-Pesa, where you could SMS money to each other, and they've essentially figured out a way to share money without needing a traditional brick and mortar bank. When we look at our own business strategy as MetaMask, and we look at where monthly active users are, United States is number one, but it's really quickly followed by Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Turkey is in the top 10, Russia's in the top 10. These are all, and Argentina and Brazil. These are all places that have kind of a tumultuous traditional financial environment right now. And so when we, think about the app, when we created MetaMask Learn, the first thing we decided was, despite being a US based company, we're a global company. We have people in 30 different countries. We want to make sure that everything is translated in local languages, because in the US, where regulators are bearing down on the fallout of FTX, sentiment hasn't really dipped in places like Vietnam and the Philippines. I think that's actually where we're going to see even some of the most interesting new gaming ideas or new financial primitives, where people actually are skipping banks and traditional loan structures and saying, oh, I'm going to create a lending pool on chain. So I think it takes a while for us to, match some of the existing companies that are really big in East Asia, especially, but Southeast Asia, I'm feeling really good about. And also the Ethereum Foundation they recently announced that DevCon 8 is going to likely be somewhere in Southeast Asia. So it's really incumbent on the community to think beyond English, beyond the US.
I'll go for that Bali trip.
Anthony, you wanna come in here with the next question?
Yeah. So I mean, I was able to interview Charlie Shrem this morning, and I asked him just like, how do you scale Bitcoin? So I'll ask you, how do you scale Ethereum?
The fees are too damn high. I mean, no, fees are great right now because it's supply and demand, and there's not as much on-chain activity as the heyday of November 2021. But really, it's about, I think it's two things. You need usable layer 2 networks. I'm for the idea of more zero knowledge EVMs, ZK EVMs. So ConsenSys, we have a testnet version. We're going to go live with our own zero knowledge EVM, ZK EVM, pretty soon. And the whole point of it is that you have massively increased throughput. So you can send, millions of transactions versus thousands of transactions, and it won't throttle the network. And two, you have way cheaper fees. So, I don't think even public Ethereum as it is now is ready for mass adoption, because no one is going to spend $20 worth of ETH to do a everyday financial transaction like buying a cup of coffee. I do think that, if all things go to plan, you'll be using your MetaMask wallet and not know even what network you're on. You'll just be connecting to different networks based on different use cases. And there's like strong arguments that Ethereum already is becoming this sort of network of networks where, all these networks are interoperable and you can switch, value between them, but the same constructs apply, like you're still using a blockchain. And so, yeah, in the future, I'd also like to see with zero knowledge, you have more privacy where, a sort of pedestrian example is, I guess, I'm guessing you're now 22 or, 21. You go to a bar and, you need to prove to the bartender or the doorman that you're 21. You don't need to prove anything else. You shouldn't even have to give your name, Anthony Garrett. You shouldn't have to give your address. You shouldn't have to even give what state you're in or your height. And one of the beautiful things about zero knowledge proofs is the idea of presenting information that is necessary and everything else being kind of private. So when, if a regulator were to hear that and they're like, oh, wait, you want a more private version of crypto? Isn't crypto just used to scam people and finance, terrorism and illicit activity? It's like, no, you could actually have a world where not only is it more transparent than our existing financial system, but you have a certain sort of selective privacy where I'm a company, I'm sending money to another company. A regulator could see the information they need to make sure that everything is above board, but nothing else. And this is largely theoretical, but just 20 years ago, the idea of a zero knowledge proof in finance was theoretical. It was the domain of mathematicians at Gonzaga. It was the domain of Eli Ben Sasson, who created Starkware. He was an applied mathematician studying zero knowledge proofs, and he was only interested in it from a mathematical concept. And now all of a sudden he's running he's part of a multi-million-dollar network because there's actual use cases and applications for these really exciting mathematical concepts.
One thing, going back on what you're saying about regulators, I'm genuinely curious. I follow this quite a bit, and we were talking before. I think I personally have never liked the fact that just like there's all these crypto booms, price goes crazy. CNN, everyone want to talk about Bitcoin price, then we get some negative press, and then it's like these guys are horrible people, and also like for a lot of these students, like I think even maybe their families calling them like, hey, are you sure you want to be in that Bitcoin thing, right? But how is ConsenSys view your guys' role in like engaging and kind of like educating regulators, and what is the general like temperature? Where do you see it heading? Because I mean, for me, I feel like at least in the West, like US based, it's getting quite aggressive, but wondering your thoughts.
Yeah, we have, within ConsenSys, we have a government affairs task force, and their remit is to figure out ways to engage lawmakers in Washington, D.C., to respond to requests for comments. And these requests for comment come from Treasury. They come from different departments in the US, but also across the world. Like we respond to a lot of ideas around, in the UK, they're thinking about how do we regulate stable coins, and we'll do a legal analysis and provide our opinion. I think what is good about the crypto ecosystem is that at least in the US, there's been a lot more coordination around public views on things, like even a question that I can't believe we're still talking about, is Ether a security? We have organizations like the Blockchain Association and Coin Center that are providing a lot of good analysis and papers and opinions that are kind of giving us a coordinated approach to what we think should be responsible self-regulation within the industry, but also ways to combat people like, that do break the industry down. Like you were saying, Patrick, like, SBF did a lot of damage to the ecosystem, and it's not because crypto is inherently dangerous. It's because what he was doing with these new crypto assets was unlawful.
I think my bet is within 4 years you're gonna see an election cycle where this is like quite the narrative. Like there's gonna be like crypto heavy candidates. Anthony, you wanna shoot one out here?
Yeah, this is kind of a open-ended question. It's about, so yeah, your Medium account, your bio is discovering the language of Ethereum. So can you kind of expand on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I now use Mirror. It's like a Web3 version of Medium, but when I did start in crypto, everything was, company blogs, everyone was using Medium. Back actually, President Obama used to have a Medium, which is kind of wild to think about. But anyways, yeah. So when I say discovering the language of Ethereum, there is somewhat of like a snark to all the new words that crypto comes out with in Web3. Not only technical terms like when we were talking about zero knowledge proofs, but there's a lot of neologisms and even internal, like, people love saying GM to each other or NGMI, not going to make it. Like, that's fun because it is this sort of like collegial club environment of being in crypto. But at the same time, one of my jobs as a communicator is to think, what are terms that, one, are translatable across languages, but two, are not going to just make people think or be turned off by the idea of crypto because they're like, oh, I have no time to download all this new vocabulary and I don't want to be opening up a glossary just to understand what a project is supposed to be doing. So yeah, I think, everyone who's active in the industry now is probably in some ways part of the language creation of what we're doing. And, it is exciting that maybe every cycle we have a new term like Nifty-Fi, and we're like, oh, it's like NFT finance. And at the same time, I'm like, how can we think about things that people are already familiar with? Yeah. So maybe that's kind of my answer.
I think like we'll probably have, let's say, like a few thousand students watching this event, and decent amount of them probably on the engineering side and thinking about maybe working on blockchain projects. Can you explain a little bit like the role Infura plays and kind of the core infrastructure and why people might want to check it out when they're thinking about developing?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So when Infura first came out, it was actually just a solution for our own company. We had a lot of engineers that were like, I want to create a dApp, a decentralized application. To do that, you have to run your own network infrastructure. You have to run an Ethereum node using a client. So, you could use Nethermind, or you basically run client software. And so if you were just trying to make for example, a poker game, a really simple game that used crypto, you would also have to not only deploy that program, you'd have to be running network infrastructure. So it kind of became cumbersome, and ConsenSys said, what if we just run an API? We have smart network infrastructure managers, basically run network infrastructure and do what they're good at, and then expose it via API to someone who's just wanting to create an end user application. At the time, Bitcoiners and people who are really decentralization maximalists raised a pretty good criticism. They're like, wait a second, so you're telling me you're creating a decentralized app, but you're using a centralized API to run it? And that sort of criticism stands strong. But the need for that infrastructure is not diminished because it's running on cloud infrastructure. And cloud infrastructure actually has a lot of advantages of not having to run servers locally. So now, flash forward to 2023, we have 15 companies that are doing the exact same Ethereum API service that Infura is. And so there's not as much criticism because there's more decentralization of options of these APIs. You have QuickNode, you have Morales, you have Alchemy. These are, some of these are $1 billion valuated companies. The goal of Infura, though, is to decentralize its API service. So about a year ago, the founder of Infura, E.G. Galano, announced a decentralized infrastructure network where even the the requests could be like the infrastructure around API requests could be decentralized, and we have there's like a whole set of terms around like operators and validators. But the other goal of Infura is to just get as many developers building blockchain applications as possible. So they really want ease of use to be one of the things that you think of Infura as, and reliability. Like if I'm creating an NFT marketplace and I need to just get Ethereum data, like, how much does Garrett.eth have in his wallet? And I need to ping that request. You need to get that back in lightning speed, and it needs to be reliable. And so that we're really focused on creating a reliable Ethereum API service. And then, down the line, in the same way that AWS provides a whole marketplace of different developer tools, we have that capability and skill. So like on-chain notifications and different standard development kits. And we also don't just provide access to Ethereum. We're the longest running IPFS API. So we also provide near access to the Near blockchain, to Arbitrum, to Optimism. So yeah, I think of it as like the picks and shovels that keep the network on.
Got it. And then just curious, are there any like specific resources you would direct some of the students to, or like programs you guys have, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, to this day, ConsenSys Academy, if you're a developer, is still one of the best ways to learn Solidity and to do various lessons and get accredited as a blockchain engineer. A lot of what we have with ConsenSys Academy is free to use, and then we will be running cohorts where we do more like in-person training. There's also soon to be announced program where we're going to be doing an accelerator for students who are, or people who are interested in starting a DAO. And so we'll set them up with the existing DAO stack, how to set up voting, how to set up communications, how to create a token if you want to, how to create token gated access. And then, ultimately, like, it's about educators in the field, and there's like a lot of just great builder personalities online. And so I encourage, it's weird to say this, but Twitter is a great resource if you're trying to keep up with latest, developer tools and development in the space. And then if you're just trying to teach people about basics of Web3, learn.metamask.io.
Nice, appreciate that. Yeah, we'll stay in touch on the DAO stuff. We're in touch with over like 100 universities, so we can definitely help spread the message. Anthony, you wanna maybe take your last question here?
Yeah. Well, so I deal mostly with like financial advisors advising clients on how to get into crypto, and so our general rule of thumb is to not have advisors ever see like private key generations, for clients. And so, like, do you guys have any sort of plan on having like a social recovery, like MPC type wallet?
That's a really awesome question. So if you're working with financial institutions or financial advisors, I would suggest you connect them with our wallet, MetaMask Institutional. So, the traditional MetaMask Fox is orange. We have a blue Fox. The difference between MMI and regular MetaMask is twofold. One, it has the ability to connect to custodians. So if you're, there's like a lot of custodial services that split up keys that are, what we call MPC wallets, or a multi-party computation, which means that there's not that single party risk. If you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, specifically if you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars of not your own money, you do not want to be responsible for those keys. Like, no matter how cool, or no matter how good you think your own security practices are. And then the other part is you have to do certain compliance and reporting. So MetaMask Institutional has like built-in compliance and reporting, and also the ability to connect to, I think we have 15 different custodians that you can have options to connect to. For MetaMask, though, down the line, I think two really big topics right now in the crypto wallet space are around account abstraction, meaning how do you essentially create a wallet scenario that doesn't need a secret recovery phrase or a seed phrase to recover the wallet. That, to me, is the future, because I think we'll look back on this time and the whole idea of writing down your secret recovery phrase, keeping it in a safe or hiding it somewhere will seem kind of like ancient history or very backwards because of new models for security. So we're definitely thinking about that. And the entire design principles of MetaMask is to open source the wallet, meaning if you have an idea for a new signature method, or let's say you want to add Bitcoin to MetaMask, or what if you want to add your blockchain network to MetaMask, build a snap. So we give a lot of bounties for people who build these snaps, which are like new implementations of MetaMask or new features. And some of the most exciting snaps we're seeing right now are around account abstraction, key recovery, and different signing signatures.
Definitely. Yeah, I've been reading Vitalik talk about that a lot lately. But hey, I think we're bumping up to time here, and I definitely want to respect everyone's time. I guess I'll close this out. And, I think for any of the students watching, maybe some have been in this space now for a couple of years, maybe some are new to it. What advice would you give them if you were a student today and kind of knowing what you know now? Like, how would you be, how would you advise them on thinking about if they're getting into a career in the space?
Yeah, so I think what's exciting about crypto right now is that despite the sell-off, despite the market kind of seeming like it's in a slump, it's never a better time to access a lot of the funding that protocols have in their treasury. So, inevitably, a lot of even student organizations have a lot of sway in protocols like Uniswap governance. There are all sorts of different DeFi protocols or NFT groups that have like these treasuries, and they want to spend it because they want to benefit their community or expand, or they need builders. And so even if you don't have a job at an established company, or you're still looking for your spot in Web3, spend some time, go to Discords, check out various governance tokens treasuries, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to find a grants program. And if you and your friend can write a compelling grant, likely you can get some tokens sent to you. And so there's a lot of ways of kind of working freelance within the space, which I think is good. And then the other thing is, some people say your on-chain reputation is your reputation. And so don't be afraid to take risks and to sort of make a name for yourself by doing things on-chain. So if you care about NFTs, make sure you have NFTs in your wallet. If you want to try different layer 2 solutions or zero knowledge networks, use them and test them out. More often than not too, there's some sort of airdrop involved for use. Like Optimism did a retroactive airdrop. And then finally, go to a hackathon. I think it can be seemingly intimidating to spend money to go to Denver and sign up and try to find a team. But hackathons are a great way to just meet other builders in the space that become either lifelong friends or your future colleagues in your company. And hackathons are there's so many, and companies do have a lot of money to put up for bounties and for hackathon prizes. So I encourage everyone to check out a hackathon in your area.
Definitely. Well, a lot of great advice, and it's been an awesome conversation. Again, for anyone watching, I would definitely, if you don't know much about ConsenSys and the suite of what they offer, go check it out. They're a key part of the core infrastructure in this world, and definitely when you're looking to develop products, things like Infura can speed up the process immensely. So appreciate your time, James and Anthony. And for everyone watching, stay tuned. We will go to the next interview after this. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. Thank you guys very much. Yeah.